Okay, so we've created a simple smart contract using Solidity, and we've deployed it to the blockchain using the Remix IDE. So now what? Let's check out a way we can interact with that contract outside of the Remix IDE. There's a JavaScript library specifically designed for doing this, and it is the second part of what we call DApps, D-A-P-P-S, Decentralized Applications. The smart contracts are one side of the equation, and the side interacting with those contracts, usually some kind of traditional website, are on the other side. So let's take a look at the kinds of things we can do with the Web3 JavaScript library. So in a future video, we're going to go over exactly how to build a website that contains and initially loads the Web3 JavaScript library. But for now, we're just going to pull up the console and run some rather simple JavaScript commands to see just how it works in general, get a feel for what it's like to interact with a smart contract via JavaScript. So what we'll do is we've got our Mist browser up again, which has a lot of the tools we need already built in for this type of development. So let's go ahead and right click on a page, say Open Developer Tools. That will pull up our console, which allows us to run JavaScript commands. If it opens up on the Elements page, it'll look like this. Just click over to console. Now, one important concept is the actual loading of the Web3 library. We're not going to go over that again in this video. In a future video where we actually build a website from scratch, I'm going to go ahead and show you that. If you have an older version of Mist, it may already be included. That's what Mist used to do. It doesn't do it anymore. So if you got the newest version of Mist, you're kind of SOL, but let's keep moving forward, and I'll show you in a later video how to get all this set up from the ground up. So really what Web3 does is it communicates with whatever blockchain, whatever software running behind the scenes that's communicating with the blockchain. So in the case of the Mist browser, there's a lower level service that's reading to and writing from the blockchain. If you're just using a regular browser like the Chrome browser, you may have MetaMask installed. That's a good tool for running its own blockchain. But basically the first thing you need to do is tell the Web3 library where that background service is and what it is. In order to do that, we can typically run a line like this. It may look kind of cryptic at this point, but once again, I'm sorry to keep talking about a future video, but exactly what this does will be made clear in that future video. Just know for now it's kind of boilerplate that you always have to have there. So that establishes this variable called web3, that a JavaScript variable. The next thing we need to do is to tell that web3 variable kind of some aspects of the smart contract we're going to interact with, what it looks like, what functions it can call, what kind of meta information it has associated with that. And in order to do that, we pass in what is called an ABI. It's kind of you can think of it as a description of the contract. It has these functions we created. If you'll recall, we had an add goal, and that takes in a string element, the commitment description. So it tells us not only what functions we can call from the smart contract, but what type of variables we'll be passing in. And there's a bunch of other stuff like that. Now, the ABI is not the easiest thing to generate by hand. So let me show you how you can grab the ABI after the fact and not have to do it. All you have to do is go up, let's open back up our Remix IDE. So we had this contract that we previously deployed. This was our commitment contract that was covered in the previous video. What you can do is if you go over to the compiled version there in the Compile tab, click on Details. You'll have a whole lot of information that you can just copy and paste about this contract. Specifically here is the interface, the ABI. You can look at it in kind of human readable mode, or just hit the copy button here, and that will put it into the format we need in the console of the developer tool. So that's exactly where I got this from. So run that command. Basically all it did is it set up that contract spec variable that now holds all the meta information about the contract so that the JavaScript library knows how to use it. So the next step is to tell the JavaScript exactly where the contract is at. So once again, you can get that from the deployment settings. You can just copy that and it gives you the address of the contract on the blockchain. I have that copied and pasted already, so I'll put that in there. So contract spec, which is referring to this, and just gives it an address that the contract lives at and loads the return value into the contract variable. So next, now that we know where the contract is and how to interact with the contract, we can call the functions just like we did in the Remix IDE, only we'll do them programmatically. This is actually exactly what behind the scenes what the Remix IDE is doing. When we clicked on commitments and add goal here, it was just doing all this in the background, but now we know how to do it ourselves, so we can do it in a website in the future. So you need to run something like this. This is some code I've copied and pasted. So get Coinbase is a built-in function that will kind of interact with the wallet that you have set up in the Mist browser or the MetaMask browser if that's what you're using, or MetaMask Chrome add-on. All of these calls need to be asynchronous, so it's best to do it kind of all in one big nested function. So see what we're doing? We're using this contract variable, which we defined up here, or loaded into, defined and loaded information into, and we're calling the add goal function, which you remember was in our ABI and in our initial contract. Back here, the add goal function. We're just calling that, and I had this set up to work on the existing page, so you'll see the from, we need to pass in from, that's the address that we are making this call from, which in this case was, we called web3 get Coinbase, which will return a result, which is an address, so we're passing in that address in the from variable. After we add that, it'll give us some. Change this. So once this is finished executing and adding this goal, it's going to call this callback function and print something out to the console, which is the transaction hash. So let's see if this works. And when you call that code, you'll be prompted, as always, to pay for gas. And you'll get a transaction ID as the return. So now that we've seen how to write smart contracts with Solidity, using the Remix IDE, how to deploy them to the blockchain, and then how to interact with them using JavaScript once they're already deployed, let's start looking at some tools that'll help us put all of that together into one self-contained unit. So that's what our future videos will be on. We'll start exploring the Truffle framework, and we'll see you in a few days when we get that posted. Thanks. Bye.